This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. 15.1 million. That is the number of decorative chocolate coins sold worldwide to mark Chinese New Year. It's what director Danny Boyle apparently spent on his smash hit Slumdog Millionaire. And it is also, according to figures out this week, the number of listeners tuning into Radio 2 each week. It's the station's highest ever audience, beating its previous record by a cool 500,000. But uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. In this week's feedback, following some far-reaching changes to his schedule and his presenting team, Radio 2 controller Bob Shannon faces his very voluble critics.
My name is Roger Hayes. Why have you taken this decision, and what consultation or research did you do that led you to it? The consequences of your decision appear to me to be unjust.
We'll also hear why Mary Hockaday, head of the BBC Newsroom, refuses to have quotas for women on news programmes, despite them being vastly outnumbered by men.
I think it risks, like any quota, distorting debate. I don't know that it serves women well. If women, you have this debate in employment as well, if women feel they're there because of a quota.
And the joy of syrup, particularly when it is golden and poured all over Yorkshire pudding.
My mum used to do it as a dessert. So we used to have...
sweetened condensed milk?
No, golden syrup on it.
Delicious, but even better with custard. We begin with Radio 2, which has a huge audience and provides a huge range of programmes. But the BBC Trust said in 2010 that it should use this scale and influence to take more risks and be more distinctive. The man responsible for maintaining the network's popularity and also delivering what the Trust wants is its controller, Bob Shannon. Recently, he's made some major changes at the station which have left many loyal listeners feeling, well, let down. So we asked him to come into the studio to discuss his recent decisions, particularly the one to transform the spiritual music programme, the Sunday Half Hour, into the Sunday Hour, and to move it from 8:30 on a Sunday evening to 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Here is a selection of your reactions.
Douglas Snow, Bexley Heath in Kent. I'm sure one of the reasons to be given will be to increase Radio 2's Sunday evening audience figures. The BBC is a public service broadcaster and therefore should not be chasing an audience, but providing a service.
My name is Christine Curtis. I'm a Christian who lives in North West Shropshire. If and when the changed timings lead to numbers dropping even further, it will then be the perfect excuse for the BBC to drop any Sunday radio show related to Christianity.
Hello, my name is Christine Cresswell and I live in Isleham in Cambridgeshire. It adds insult to injury to be told that we can listen to it on my iPlayer. I am 70 and have no idea what iPlayer is.
My name is Roger Hayes. I live in West Wales, and I felt the decision was at best insensitive and possibly even might be described as arrogant, because a substantial number of the listeners are obviously in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and even some are over 100 years old. That group of people are ill-equipped to challenge insensitive decisions that I've just described. Why have you taken this decision, and what consultation or research did you do that led you to it?
Listening to those comments with me is Bob Shannon, the controller of Radio 2. So, picking up Roger Hayes' point, why are you moving the Sunday Half Hour?
Well, there's no getting away from it. When I hear those comments, this move has affected people and upset people, and I'm very conscious of that. And had to make this decision in the full knowledge that there were some people who were really going to lose out. But I made the move because during the past decade or so, the audience to Sunday Half Hour has declined steeply. In fact, there are now fewer than half the number of people who used to listen to it now listening to the programme. But of course it's an important programme, and we've moved it to a place in the schedule where twice as many people are available to listen to the radio as listen at 8:30 in the evening. And this enables us to rebuild a strong Sunday evening music schedule and at the same time place Sunday Hour alongside Good Morning Sunday in a high priority, high audience, 3-hour faith zone on Radio 2 in the morning.
Well, let's pick up some of those points. You've said some people will lose out. You've also said that the key reason is the drop in ratings to perhaps half, slightly less than half. But of course, people would say public service broadcasters are not there to maximise audience alone. They're there to provide programming for people who will not get that programme anywhere else at a time they want to listen.
I think that the reality is that had I not taken this decision, the audience figures for the programme would have continued to dwindle and decline until somebody decided it was impossible to continue. Remember, this decline is against a backdrop of significant increase in the number of people coming to Radio 2. And the thing that disturbs me most about it is that the significant amount of decline is in the audience above the age of 65. This isn't a younger audience that's turning off. Actually, it's an older audience that's turning off.
That older audience, as we've heard from some of those contributors, are not as fluent often in the use of the new technology as younger people are. So for them to say, well, it's available online, listen again to it, whatever, is not much of a help, is it?
I do appreciate that. But I do also have to consider the 250,000 people, many of them older listeners, who have been forced to stop listening to Radio 2 because of the schedule we're offering them. And I think it's important that their interests are looked after too.
Does this mean that you are pretty confident the audience will not decrease as a result of it being moved?
Yes, I certainly would hope that that's the case.
And what happens if it does? What happens if it actually does decrease?
In answer to your question, and also to one of your correspondents who felt that this was perhaps a cynical move towards effectively killing the programme, there's absolutely no intention whatsoever. I'm pretty confident it'll flourish in that slot. Were it not to, Radio 2 would look at an alternative for it. The point that it's an integral part of our public service offer is completely accepted by everybody at Radio 2. We know we have that responsibility. I think that what we're doing will enable the programme to flourish. But at no point is somebody going to cynically say, oh, well, it's falling as well at 6 o'clock in the morning, so we'll kill it.
And another change, of course, in the early Sunday morning on Radio 2 is the replacement of Aled Jones with Claire Balding. And listener Susie Veal says, Claire's an excellent journalist, but I question the suitability of a sports journalist as the right person to head the religious content that is Good Morning Sunday. I've not got the impression that Claire is a particularly religious person, is she?
I don't think Claire's just a sports presenter either. I mean, Claire, to me, is an outstanding broadcaster. And what Claire brings to this programme is her warmth, her interviewing ability, her inquiring mind.
But that would qualify her for most programmes, most discussion programmes. Here, people ask for a genuine interest, passion for, not necessarily belief in, religion. Has Claire got that?
I don't think that you'd have found Aled Jones was particularly stamping his religious authority on the programme in the way that he went about it. This is a mainstream programme on Radio 2 with a very considerable audience, and the most important hallmark of the presenter is to have all of those attributes that I've just described.
Now, before the changes to the Sunday morning schedule, there was another change at Radio 2 which upset many of our audience. After 15 years presenting the folk show, Mike Harding was replaced by Mark Radcliffe. Here are just some of your comments.
My name's Tom. I live in London. I'm amazed and saddened that Radio 2 has sacked Mike Harding from Folk on 2. Under Mike Harding's positive leadership, the number of listeners has increased dramatically, and he's developed the programme and the folk scene in general.
My name's Bill Bravenet. I'm from Washington and Tyne and Wear. Mike Harding's such a big figure in the folk world. He knows the folk scene. He knows a lot of folk artists. Lots of the responses that we've had have centred on things like the need to refresh programmes and what have you. And yet there are other programmes on Radio 2 which haven't had presenters refreshed for a long, long time.
Why did you make that decision?
Well, again, it's another of those decisions that you really do not take lightly. But the fundamental reason behind it was because I felt that we could improve our folk offering generally across Radio 2 and that it was time for us to refresh the format. The way Mike Harding used to make the programme, the way we asked him to make the programme, was that A, it was pre-recorded, it was heavily post-produced. I think that's a format we're moving away from on Radio 2, to give programmes much more of a live and contemporary feel.
But that's an argument for changing the programme. It's
Correct.
not an argument for changing the presenter. Presumably you could have had Mike Harding down and said, look, we'd like the programme to evolve in this way, and would you like to do it?
Truth is, I felt that Mike was really well suited to the former format. less well suited to the way we wanted it to go in the future. On the contrary, Mark Radcliffe is a brilliant live broadcaster.
But you see what the worry that a lot of people have, and Jennifer Worrell has written, is one of them. She sees this as a sign of the BBC's lack of commitment to specialist music, particularly the folk genre. Can you reassure her?
I certainly can. We made January folk a major priority on Radio 2, with live sessions in the programme that you would not have heard before. We are in the week of the Radio 2 Folk Awards, in which we will be broadcasting a total of 5 hours of content consecutively around folk music. We now reflect dance music, we now reflect reggae, we reflect Latin music with Gloria Estefan. We've got major country outside broadcasts coming up. So I feel that our commitment is greater now than ever before.
Well, one last question then on this issue, not so much the decision, but the way you took it. Mike Harding has obviously been very popular, as I think Radio 2 said when he was asked to move on, an exceptional job. But he said that the only time anybody phoned him from Radio 2 was when you phoned him to tell him he was going to get the push. Is that the way to treat somebody who served Radio 2 so well?
To be clear, I would see Mike occasionally at major Radio 2 events. But once I'd made the decision that I felt we needed to change the format significantly, I think I did exactly the right thing. I spoke personally and directly to Mike myself. I didn't want to do it through an intermediary, through a production company. And I would love Mike Harding to still have a role on Radio 2.
Your door's still open to him?
Of course.
Can we move on then, not to, as it were, the content so much as to the transmission? This happened last Sunday.
Join me, Mark Radcliffe, alongside Julie Fowler, to say hi, Michael. For the BBC Radio 2 nominate Nimros from Edward Elgar's No. 9 Enigma Variations. On 88 to 91 FM.
I think that's enough of the evident pain that we're causing you, Bob Shannon. But how did it happen, and how did it go on for 15 minutes?
Yes, it's excruciating to hear it. And first of all, I should apologise to the listeners whose enjoyment of our Sunday evening schedule and our new programme was so hopelessly affected by that change. We have recently introduced a new system to the way we play out our schedule, an automated and quite complex schedule.
And you introduced it because it allows you to cut costs, because it means that you don't have to have as many presentation staff around.
Indeed, and the system itself is extremely robust. The problems that we've experienced and the problem that occurred last night were to do with human error.
But you see, it happened several times last year, including one instance when Elaine Page's programme disappeared off-air for around half an hour. This can't be a coincidence that the BBC is cutting back in a number of areas, and the number of problems like this seems to be increasing.
Well, I've got, since we launched Autoplayer, I think I've got a log of 4 individual cases, of which the Elaine Page show was one of them, and last night was another, and none of them are acceptable. All of them are different in terms of the cause. All of them are due to the way the system was operated by human beings rather than the system itself failing. But it was a very serious error. We take it extremely seriously. We know it affected a lot of people's enjoyment of Radio 2. They've told us so. I apologise for that. What I can reassure people about is that we've got to the root cause of the problem, and we'll ensure that there's appropriate training support so that we don't make the same mistakes again.
Our thanks to Radio 2 controller Bob Shannon. And the size of his audience is not the only headline to come out of this week's Radar radio listening figures. Six Music was another winner, increasing its average weekly audience by nearly a third year-on-year to 1.9 million. Radio 1, in contrast, lost over 500,000 listeners. But hang on the all-important breakfast show, new boy Nick Grimshaw lost a few listeners, but crucially added nearly 250,000 of that longed-for 15 to 24-year-old audience. And listening online has jumped to 51 million hours a week. That's up 43% on last year's figures. Next week we'll be talking to Daniel Danker, who, as General Manager of On Demand, is the man in charge of iPlayer and all that online listening you're doing so much of. Please let me know what you would like me to ask him. And talking of essential modern technology, 5 Live seems to be short of mouse traps.
Oh, my God! Oh! How horrible! Oh, gosh, I'm sorry. I'm live on the radio squealing and saying how horrible and kneeling on my chair because there's a mouse in the room. Oh, no.
Sheila Fogarty climbing up the wall there. Irresistible. When she stays in her seat, Miss Fogarty is an excellent interviewer. And this week the airwaves have been full of particularly striking examples of the art. Here is a selection, introduced by the listeners who chose them.
Let's see you do it, Southend, because this is it. Dr. Feelgood.
My name's Gary Reid. I was listening to John Wilson's interview with Wilko Johnson on Front Row. Just struck by the power of Wilko's story, dealing with a really difficult subject of his own impending death.
And the doctor told me, you've got cancer, and it was quite plain it was an inoperable thing, that there was nothing they could do. We walked out of there and I felt an elation of spirit. You're walking along and suddenly you're vividly alive.
It was very poetic, it was very poignant, it was very sad. And John Wilson, there was a bit where he said about the farewell tour, which I thought was a really brave question to ask.
But you're going out with defiance. This is, you're billing it as a farewell tour. So many bands, so many musicians talk about the farewell tour and then they're back again a few years later. But of course, you've got no choice.
Well, I've got no choice about that at all. No, I can't go on singing I Did It My Way for another 5 years or something.
John Wilson was just able to ask those questions and say things that got that out of Wilko. It was just stoic and understated, but very, very poignant, and it was great.
My name is Marilyn, and I'm a Londoner. I listened to the John Humphreys, Henny O'Brien interview last Friday.
She's one of the tiny handful of survivors of the concentration camps who are still alive today. And she has told her...
It moved me to contact the BBC, something I've never done before.
That I am a witness, and the future generations must see to it that will never happen again.
From the perspective of John Humphreys, I felt that he showed so much sensitivity and insight. It was enabling her to go further and give more.
How much anger is there?
There is no anger at this time. There's just sadness, but not all the time. At the beginning, there was a lot of anger and hate and grief and for many years, but that slowly goes away with having your own family.
This week, a programme with a few different layers.
Hi, I'm Nikki from Manchester. That's my 18-month-old grandson, Daniel. I was actually making marmalade when I was listening to Sheila Dillon talking to Paul McCartney.
Most of the food I liked and have fond memories of. Desserts were things like a tin of mandarin oranges.
The thing that I thought was so good and just pulled you straight into that kitchen and into the interview was when she said, "And can you remember what came out of that oven?"
Well, I have this picture here. It's your kitchen. I wonder what you remember about that kitchen and the food that came out of that oven.
Well,
when traditional cooking and Yorkshire puddings were mentioned, he said that they didn't have Yorkshire pudding as part of the main meal, but as part of the dessert. I thought, yeah, with golden syrup. It had to be with golden syrup. And seconds later, that was what he said.
So we used to have
sweetened condensed milk.
No, golden syrup on it. Although condensed milk.
And in fact, I've made them with my grandson today as well.
In spite of all the danger, in spite of all that may be.
My thanks to all of you who contacted us with those examples, and I promise to study them closely. Do keep contacting us to let us know what strange, striking or simply splendid sounds come out of your radios, or whatever you use to listen to BBC Radio. Our address is, of course, feedback, P.O. Box 67234, London SE1P4AX. You can call and leave a phone message on 03 333 444 544. Standard landline charges apply, but it could cost more on some mobile networks. You can also email feedback@bbc.co.uk, and you can find us on Twitter by following @BBCR4Feedback or by using the hashtag R4Feedback. All those details are on our website.
Oh, my God!
Yes, it's that simple. Now, over the last few weeks, we've been considering the question of the imbalance in the numbers of women and men you hear on the airwaves. And after last week's discussion of the particular challenges facing programmes specialising in areas such as science and history, many of you got in touch about underrepresentation in news. So, I went to talk to the woman who runs the BBC newsroom, Mary Hockaday, and played some of your comments to her.
Alice Griffiths from Great Missenden. Wow, hadn't realised what a girl-free zone the Today programme is these days. Between about 7:45 and 8, prime time I assume, we heard from a weatherman, plus Jim and John, and 6 other people, only one of which was female.
My name is Fred Williams. I'm in Ilford. I think we need more women presenters. That way we can get a diversity of views and opinions. And I'm amazed that when they're calling in experts, they say there's no woman available. I suggest the Today programme gets a new phone book.
My name's Chion Wara. I'm the MP for Newcastle Central. Politics is male-dominated, but the media should surely be looking to have different voices as well. You may have to get the minister on, but then you almost always have somebody else putting forward a different view. And there we have great backbenchers on both sides of the House. I would like somebody to name me a subject that they don't think they can find a woman to speak about, and I will take personal responsibility to find a woman to speak about that subject from the point of view of politics.
With me in the studio listening to those contributions is Mary Hockaday, who is head of the BBC Newsroom. Ms Hockaday, are you happy with the gender balance on BBC News programmes?
We've made a lot of progress, but there's further that we can go. And it's something that we are taking seriously, like all the media, something that our editors and production teams think about as one of the things that they consider when they're deciding what agenda to cover and who we're going to hear on the airwaves.
And do you have any targets, any quotas you think it's appropriate to fix?
We don't have a numerical target. We have a clear objective of making sure that all our output does a number of things. One is covers the news really effectively. Secondly, make sure that we talk to the right people who are at the heart of stories, at the centre of stories. And thirdly, that we offer a really good range of views and expertise. And that as part of that sense that we represent society as a whole and a wide range of views, that, yes, we can increase the numbers of women that we hear.
But you haven't got a target?
We haven't got a numerical target.
I ask you a target because we've measured who was in the Today programme this week from the 28th to the 30th of January, between 8 and 9. And it's roughly 4.5 to 1 in favour of men. We also look at 5 Live Breakfast, similar period. That's rather different. It's still 2 to 1 in favour of men. So a lot of our listeners, they obviously want the best people, but they also say this is a bit crazy. I mean, 4 to 1, 5 to 1 male voices to female voices.
Well, that's a particular snapshot. You know, amongst those contributors, we've had several female MPs, we've had a Baroness, we've had a Police and Crime Commissioner. We don't believe a numerical target is right because it could distort the editorial choices we're making. We think about who we want to talk to, a number of considerations. It's often the people who have the power in a story. They might be the person who wrote the report. They might run the organisation that we're somehow holding to account. We can't control or decide who that organisation is represented by. And, you know, by and large, society still being the way it is, they are often men. It's a debate, I think, that society's having as well. And a lot of the institutions that we are often talking to and reflecting are themselves very aware that, you know, the number of MPs, female MPs, is, you know, lower probably than the representation that we manage on air. Now,
but what about the people who ask the questions then? When it comes to your own presenters and reporters, yes, people say, why isn't that 50-50? Why, for example, are there 4 presenters of the Today programme who are men and only 1 who's a woman?
Well, again, if you look back compared to several years ago, I think the mix of presenters and reporters we have across Radio 4 and all our output is very different from it was. I mean, at the moment, you know, the Today programme has a very strong stable of presenters. There isn't a vacancy.
You could create one.
Well, we have a very strong stable, you know, the Today programme is doing very well with its audiences.
But on that basis, you'd never change anything, would you? You occasionally, you do take people out occasionally.
Change does happen and change will happen. And we've said that overall we want to increase the numbers of women presenters.
Can we look then at areas where perhaps you do have some more discretion? The allegation by some of our listeners is that the people you go for are very trusted people, but you may have heard them a long time ago and they tend to be men, that you actually need to take steps to freshen up your phone book.
Yeah, I think this is an issue that our editors and producers want to do anyway. It's a real balance, I think. You know, for many listeners, one of the strengths of what we do is that we will often hear from people who are, if you like, a trusted guide. Now, that can be our own correspondent, but it can also be a regular and familiar and expert voice. And many of those are men, but actually many of those are women too. So it's a mix of having the trusted guide, but also refreshing and bringing in new voices.
So finally, why don't you take the pledge? And I think it was written up initially by Broadcast Magazine. It's been signed by another public service broadcaster, Channel 4, and also by Sky, which aims to up the ratio of women to men on the air.
Well, as a publicly funded public service organisation, our view is that that's not our role. So we haven't signed the pledge. But we've said we're pleased the debate is happening, we're part of that debate, and we support the aims of the pledge. In the end, we're going to make the editorial decisions we believe are the best ones to make on behalf of producing great news coverage for our audiences, but making sure that women are well represented in our news output.
And when you say well represented, what does it mean? What does it mean? I'm sorry, every time I try and tie you down to a figure, a proportion, whatever, you say things like well represented. What is well represented?
I'm not going to be tied down to a number because I think it might.
Won't.
Well, no, I think it might. Risks like any quota. Distorting debate. I don't know that it serves women well. If women, and you have this debate in employment as well, if women feel they're there because of a quota. We are taking practical steps and we are encouraging our teams and we're encouraging contributors to get together and make sure we have a good range, and a better range, I say that, a better range of women represented on our airwaves in everything we do, but we're not going to have a quota.
Our thanks to Mary Hockaday, head of the BBC Newsroom. And do let us know your thoughts on how this issue develops over the coming months. It's clearly not going to go away, and this isn't either. After we took a look at alleged book plugging on BBC Radio a couple of weeks ago, all aboard the Good Ship Feedback have been on the lookout. Here's Lynette.
I was listening to Broadcasting House, and 2 of the 3 guests invited to discuss the news were introduced with a mention of their new books.
His most recent book is The War We Never Fought, the British establishment's surrender to drugs.
I think these are free plugs. I don't see the relevance of the book mentions to the show.
A new book, Careers Advice for Ambitious Women, is out in paperback this week.
Thank you, Lynette. Well, the producers of BH had this to say.
Only one of the 3 had a new book out, and we also mentioned their other credentials as a way of putting their contributions into context for the listener.
And if you spot any more plugs on the BBC's horizon, please be sure to tell Captain Plugwatch.
Oh, my God! Oh!
Goodbye. The newsroom refuses to have quotas for women on news programmes, despite them being vastly outnumbered by men.
I think it risks, like any quota, distorting debate. I don't know that it serves women well. If women, and you have this debate in employment as well, if women feel they're there because of a quota.
And the joy of syrup, particularly when it is golden and poured all over Yorkshire pudding.
My mum used to do it as a dessert. So we used to have
sweetened condensed milk?
No, golden syrup on it.
Delicious, but even better with custard. We begin with Radio 2, which has a huge audience and provides a huge range of programmes. But the BBC Trust said in 2010 that it should use this scale and influence to take more risks and be more distinctive. The man responsible for maintaining the network's popularity and also delivering what the Trust wants is its controller, Bob Shannon. Recently, he's made some major changes at the station which have left many loyal listeners feeling,
injury to be told that we can listen to it on my iPlayer. I am 70 and have no idea what iPlayer is.
My name is Roger Hayes. I live in West Wales, and I felt the decision was at best insensitive and possibly even might be described as arrogant, because a substantial number of the listeners are obviously in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and even some are over 100 years old. That group of people are ill-equipped to challenge insensitive decisions that I've just described. Why have you taken this decision, and what consultation or research did you do that led you to it?
Listening to those comments with me is Bob Shannon, the controller of Radio 2. So, picking up Roger Hayes' point, why are you moving the Sunday half hour?
Well, there's no getting away from it. When I hear those comments, this move has affected people and upset people, and I'm very conscious of that. And had to make...
This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. 15.1 million. That is the number of decorative chocolate coins sold worldwide to mark Chinese New Year. It's what director Danny Boyle apparently spent on his smash hit Slumdog Millionaire. And it is also, according to figures out this week, the number of listeners tuning into Radio 2 each week. It's the station's highest ever audience, beating its previous record by a cool 500,000. But uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. In this week's feedback, following some far-reaching changes to his schedule and his presenting team, Radio 2 controller Bob Shannon faces his very voluble critics.
My name is Roger Hayes. Why have you taken this decision, and what consultation or research did you do that led you to it? The consequences of your decision appear to me to be unjust.
We'll also hear why Mary Hockaday, head of the BBC...
Make this decision in the full knowledge that there were some people who were really going to lose out. But I made the move because during the past decade or so, the audience to Sunday Half Hour has declined steeply. In fact, there are now fewer than half the number of people who used to listen to it now listening to the programme. But of course it's an important programme, and we've moved it to a place in the schedule where twice as many people are available to listen to the radio as listen at 8:30 in the evening. And this enables us to rebuild a strong Sunday evening music schedule and at the same time place Sunday Hour alongside Good Morning Sunday in a high priority, high audience, 3-hour faith zone on Radio 2 in the morning.
Well, let's pick up some of those points. You said some people will lose out. You've also said that the key reason is the drop in ratings to perhaps half, slightly less than half. But of course, people would say public service broadcasters are not there to maximise audience alone. They're there to provide programming for down. So we asked him to come into the studio to discuss his recent decisions, particularly the one to transform the spiritual music programme, the Sunday Half Hour, into the Sunday Hour, and to move it from 8:30 on a Sunday evening to 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Here is a selection of your reactions.
Douglas Snow, Bexley Heath in Kent. I'm sure one of the reasons to be given will be to increase Radio 2's Sunday evening audience figures. The BBC is a public service broadcaster and therefore should not be chasing an audience, but providing a service.
My name is Christine Curtis. I'm a Christian who lives in North West Shropshire. If and when the changed timings lead to numbers dropping even further, it will then be the perfect excuse for the BBC to drop any Sunday radio show related to Christianity.
Hello, my name is Christine Cresswell, and I live in Isleham in Cambridgeshire. It adds insult to